Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar today. I'm Maarten, with me is Denis, and we'll be talking to you about how to build applications for JetBrains Space.
Hi everybody.
Now, before we go in, let's quickly do some housekeeping or ground rules on how this webinar will work. So first of all, if you have any questions, if you're watching on YouTube or on Twitch, you can just ask any questions in the chats. We will try to answer as we go along. We may ask the questions live during the broadcast as well and answer them for you. Also, the session is being recorded and will be made available on YouTube afterwards. So if for some reason you have to drop out or you have to leave for just a few minutes, you can do that and later on rewatch on YouTube if that's needed. And with that, let's see how we can build applications for JetBrains Space. So first of all, before we dive into how you can start building applications, let's maybe look at what the extensibility options are in Space currently. Right now, if you have tried Space already, you will see that you can extend Space with custom fields. So if you go into the administration area, you can extend existing entities like user profiles or absences or teams and stuff like that. And you can use those to store additional data in Space if you want. Now, that is not really programmatic. It's not something that you will typically automate. It will be something that will be readily available in Space for you to add as a customization option. It does become interesting if you combine it with applications where an application can extend the logic that you have in Space using the HTTP API, for example, or Webhooks, and then modify that data that you are storing additionally in Space. So you can use those two things together if you want. This webinar is not going to be about custom fields. It's going to be about applications and how you can interact with Space using the API, using webhooks, and how you can extend functionality in Space. I added some links on the slides here. We will post them to the comments afterwards, so you can also click them and easily navigate to our website there. So let's look at some of the extensibility options that you have in Space. So right now, you can build applications that use data from Space. So if you want to work with the API and, for example, get profile information or send chat messages or update custom fields, add calendar events, things like that, you can do that currently. You can push that data into Space, so send a message. But also, if you want to get data, you can also use the API to get data from Space. So a basic application could be something as simple as a console application that you run that reads some profile information from Space and does something with that and prints some output to the console. So that could be an application. Things get more interesting if you also start combining these applications with webhooks in Space. So what you can do is in Space configure webhooks and subscribe to a lot of pretty much any type of events that happen in Space. So for example, if you want to subscribe to the fact that someone creates an issue somewhere in a project, you can get that data and you can get a call back into your application when that happens. If you want to subscribe to the fact that someone commits code to a repository somewhere in Space, you can do that as well. So those are webhooks. And then there's the actual integration option. So first of all, you can use and send data. You can receive data using webhooks, but you can also embed your application in Space so that it becomes visible inside of Space. So the easiest way to do that is using a chatbot, which we will see later on during the webinar, how you can get started with that. Chatbots can do messages, can do buttons, and you can add a little bit of interactivity to work with them and make a small application work pretty nicely actually in Space so that your users can work with it or third parties can work with it as well. You can also add custom menus. So for example, on issues or on projects or on chat messages, if you want to integrate into the UI and on a ... menu, for example, integrate and get information about that specific message and do something when someone clicks on that menu item, you can do that as well. You can also do custom unfurls or link previews. So by default, if you paste a link into a chat in Space, you will see this nice preview with an image of the website and how all of that works. Well, if you have something custom there, if you want to integrate one of your internal systems, for example, you can do that as well and bring some content over into Space so that people actually get a nice preview of the image or of the link that you just pasted instead of just that link that looks very obscure. We're not going to go too deep into those in this webinar, but we do have samples about that if you want to learn about those. And then last but not least, you can also embed your applications in space in an iframe. So what you can do is essentially create a small website or a small web application, for example, in React, embed it into space. And when people in your organization go to the application, they can work with it, interact with it within the space user interface, where you can then communicate back and forth between space to get information, push information, and all that. All right, so this is, for example, what the chat integration looks like. You can add these slash commands where people can see the menus that are available or see the different options that are available with a description. You can do things like this, where you add buttons into a chat that people can click and that you can work with. And then the last one is that you can also add things like custom menus on chats. So in this case, you can click the ... and then you see the My Custom Menu. That is something that you can create there. Now, enough with the slides. Let's maybe look at one of the building blocks of how you will work with space, and that is through the Space HTTP API. So I'm going to switch to my screen here. There we are. This is Space that you may already know and love. In Space, in the menu, you will find under the ... here, or if you know the symbol by heart, you will find extensions. And from extensions, we actually have everything around extensibility. So in this case, in this organization, you already see there's a number of applications that are registered. There is the marketplace that you may want to push your application into as well, and you can install these in your organization if you want to. And then there's the development option where you can learn about building space apps. And the API playground is probably something that you will spend a lot of time in if you are building applications for space. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller, and there we go. So what you will see in the API playground here is all of the entities that have an API available in space. So you see it's a really long list, and pretty much all of the things that you can do through the UI, you can typically also do through the API. Not everything, but most of it is available in the API. So for example, if you want to work with emoji and you want to see if a specific emoji exists, well, what I can do is search, for example, for laughing. That's going to be an emoji. Execute this request here, and I will get back a response that says true, because this emoji exists in space. Now, a couple of things that are interesting here is that, first of all, on the left, you see all of the APIs and endpoints that are available. You see that you can build the requests of what it would look like, what you want to fetch from the Space API. And then on the right-hand side, you see how you can, for example, use curl to issue an API call to this one to get the fact that an emoji exists or not, using the correct credentials and all that. You can execute it from here as well. Now, more interesting is if you are working with the Kotlin SDK, we'll see that one later on as well. You can also get a preview of which API call to use there. So you can copy it into your application and start working with that. Another thing that you can preview here is if you're doing this as a browser application, for example, is see what the JavaScript call would be here, and you can also get that one there. So HTTP API Playground really gives you all of these options of building the requests, seeing what comes back, and so forth. Now let's do something more interesting than checking if an emoji exists. Let's look at the team directory. And by the way, you can also search here. So I'm going to search for get profile, and I want to get my specific profile from the team directory. So I can get profile, and then from there, again, I can start crafting my requests. Now, most of the APIs in space that require an identifier of some sorts, whether it's a chat message or a chat channel or a profile, they will have this option to build the identifier in the playground or in the API that you can consume. So for example, if you know the ID of a profile, you can enter it here, and it will be some long string that you can make use of. So this is not really useful if you're doing this as a human being, that is. So what you can also do is either use the username and just get ellison.wing in this case, or if you want to get the information about yourself as the caller of the API, I can also use me, and then that's going to be the identifier. Now, clicking through all of these, you probably also have seen that the request here has changed. So for me, the identifier is just me. If I use a specific username, you will see that the username is appended to the URL. So again, building that request gives you how you could make this request yourself from your application. So for me, let's get some data and execute this one. And you will see that in the response, there's a lot of data by default. So you get the ID, you get the username, you get the first name, last name, and all of that. You don't get everything though. As you can see from the checkboxes here in the request builder, you don't get absence information, you don't get the birthday by default, you don't get email addresses by default. Space API lets you shape the response of what you want to get from the API. So in this case, I may only be interested in the ID, the name, the small avatar ID, and the email addresses for this user. Well, if I execute this request, you will see that the data is much more condensed and only contains the information that I want to see here. Even in this case, maybe I don't need the identifiers of these email addresses. So what I can do is just say, I just want the email address as a string, and you can also get that one there. And again, the shape has changed and I only get the information that I really want. Maybe a quick side note here as well. Again, from here, you can also look at what this would look like in the SDK that we'll be using later on. And also here, depending on what you add and what you remove, you will see that the example code will change and give you some information on how you can add this into your applications that you're building. One more thing here in the playground. Let's go into send message. I want to send a message to a chat channel. Send message is interesting because it allows you to send messages to a chat channel, of course, and a chat channel has an identifier. This identifier is slightly more complex than the previous one because a chat channel can be another application, can be the comments on an issue, can be an actual chat channel, can be a private individual that is in your project, and so on. So let's send a message to a member, and in this case, me. And what I can do is send a message as text and say, hello from API, for example, execute this one, and this one will be executed against space, and I will get that message. Now, text messages are not that interesting. You can also use our block builder and do some more interesting messages. So for example, you can add sections that have, for example, let's say a text field, and the text there is going to be hello from API. I'm also going to add a style because I want this to show up as success, a nice green style. And you see again that the request builder here is changing how you would use this from the Space SDK. And if you look at the curl request, you will also see the JSON that is being posted to the API to do this. More interesting for chat messages, we have another item in the dropdown here, and that is the UI preview. So if you want to craft nice looking chat messages, you can actually use the UI preview there and build your message from here. So let's say we want to add some size there as well and say this should be large. You will see that the font goes up. If you want to add an outline, you can do that as well. In the outline, you can add an icon, let's say an archive box or something like that. Some text as well, API. And again, you will see that the UI preview updates with all of that information. So far for the HTTP API playgrounds, this is what I want to show you there. There's one more thing that I also want to show you here. First of all, you can see the request history of all the requests that you've made. So you can always go back in time and see what happens there. Second of all, you can also authorize not only as yourself, but as an application that you create in your space organization. So if you want to see what happens if this parking application, for example, sends a message to the API, well, you can execute this one, and you will see that this one cannot execute this request because only users are allowed to send something to me. Because in this case, I'm logged in as the parking application. Me is going to be that parking application, and it makes no sense for applications to send data to themselves. But you can quickly switch between. So if I switch back to myself, you'll see that this will work. And I now send that message. I get back the message that I sent as well, so I can look at it. And if I go to chat, you'll actually see that I got a request or a message from myself that is coming from the API playground here. Cool. One more thing before we go back to slides for a second. In the extensions, there's the API playground that you can use, but since today, since this morning actually, we also have the authorization playgrounds. This one will come in handy if you're building an application and you want to work with OAuth flows, for example, and have your application do something on behalf of a user. You can actually test all of those flows from here, as you would do in code, but without writing the code. So for example, if you want to work with an authorization code type of flow, you can select the application that you want to work with and then start working with that from there. Not going to go in there, but keep this in mind if you want to test out how authentication works. This is definitely something to have a look at. And with that, I think we can go back to slides for a second. Right, so what have we seen in terms of the Space HTTP API? We have seen that there is the API playground, which is really elaborate in what you can do there and what you can see there. You can explore all of the API endpoints. You can create and execute those requests. We have seen that you can actually test out the authentication with all of the different flows that are available for an application and all of that. And typically, you would use the HTTP API to do pretty much anything with Space, importing data from other systems, managing users and teams programmatically, sending chat messages, building dashboards and reports. So you can use that if you want using the API. Actually, one example that we have there is there exists an import tool that imports issues from Jira. That is a Docker image that is essentially using nothing but the API to pull messages out of Jira and then push them into Space. All right, let's look at the next thing, and that is going to require some more screen sharing. So let's switch back to my screen. All right, there we are. And now let's look into the other scenario. The API is really about you as an application or you as a user getting data from Space, pushing data into Space. What if something happens in Space and you want to get notified of that? Well, what you can do is create your own application. You can do this here, new application. I actually already created one, and I pushed the wrong button there. I already created one called tests, very inspiring. And for every application, you can set a logo, you can set a name, you can change the owner, so that makes it easy to find out who added a specific application to your Space organization, so you can easily find that out. You can also configure the authorization options, like what permissions does my application need. If you know that your application will need to be able to, for example, view all guest users or add members to the organization, you will have to request those privileges, and an administrator of your Space organization will have to approve all those. Not going to go into these. What I wanted to show you is that we have those webhooks that you can work with. I'm going to do this through the API, through the UI, but keep in mind that if you're using the API, you can also create those webhooks through the API programmatically if needed. So what I'm going to do is, for my test application, I want to create a new webhook, and let's call this one also very inspiring test. In that webhook, I can set the endpoint, can be global for the entire application or for a specific endpoint URL. And what I'm going to put in there is the URL that I have here for my local HTTP tunnel, so that I can actually see what Space is sending to my machine that I have here. So I'm going to put that endpoint and save this one. And then I can start configuring the subscriptions for my webhook. So what I'm going to do is add a new subscription, give it a name. I'll do test again. 3 times test is probably enough. And then select the source of the data that I want to get notifications about. So what you can do is, for example, when a blog post is published by a specific marketing team, let's say that's, and when it is published, you want to get a notification. Well, by adding this subscription, you will get that notification in this case. If you want to subscribe, for example, to commits that happen in a specific project, let's say Ktor, on a specific repository that are authored by anyone and have a specific file format. So let's say anything that is a Kotlin file, you can subscribe to that if you want to have branches there. So you see what I'm getting to here is that every type of event in Space gives you not only access to the fact that something happened in terms of this is the event, but also filters in terms of what you want to see. You don't have to do all of the filtering in your application. If you know that you're only interested in certain file types, for example, you can specify this in Space, and Space will only send that information to your application in that case. Let's maybe, just as an example, quickly subscribe to issues in the Ktor project and say we want to see whenever the, let's say, the status is updated, and maybe when the summary is updated, and maybe also when the description is updated. Save this webhook, and this is now enabled. And if I later on go look in my local tunnel, I should be able to see the requests coming from Space. So what I'll do is go to that project that we just created a webhook for. For this issue, I'm going to change one of the statuses. So let's make this one open. And as you will see is that in my tunnel, I now got a post request, and that post contains all of the information about this event. So it's an issue webhook event. This user did something at this specific time, and I get back the issue ID and the status change, the old status and the new status. What you may also notice here is that Space is retrying the request, because my local tunnel is just listening on the endpoint, but not forwarding to a specific server to do something. You will see that it sends back a 502 bad gateway. Space sees that as an error, and Space will retry the request a number of times. You can also see those retries in the Space site. So for a specific webhook, if you look at the recent deliveries, you will see what was sent to the application and when, but also what the response of the application was. So in this case, it was a nice 502 something failed. But if you have something in there that is more interesting for Space, or to troubleshoot the issues with the application that you're building, you'll also see that in there if you want. So that's roughly it for webhooks. API, get data and push data to Space. Webhooks is get notified when something in Space happens on pretty much any type of entity that is there. Any questions so far that we should be answering? Or should we keep them until the end? Let's quickly look into the documents. I think we can do all of those later on during the webinar. Okay, so let's maybe go back to slides in this case. There we go. All right, back to slides. So we've seen the API, we've seen the demo about webhooks. Let's quickly summarize what you can do with webhooks. So first of all, again, webhooks are subscriptions to events in Space. Whenever something happens, you can subscribe to that event and get information from that. Typically, you would do this when, for example, you need an external system notification when someone commits something, triggers a built-in automation, creates a merge request, anything. And you can also combine those with the HTTP API. So for example, if you want to build an application that listens to any commits to any repository that you have in Space, and when that commit contains a dependency graph, maybe you want to quickly update a document in Space through the API to list all of the dependencies that you have in your software project. So that's something you could do there. More examples on the slides, but I hope you understand this is about getting the information and then doing something with it in your application using the API, for example. All right, let's go into the next one. So far, we have been using the HTTP API. Now let's maybe see how you can use the Space SDK to actually do something with Space. So let's quickly switch back to my screen, go into IntelliJ, and then have a quick look at the Kotlin SDK that we have. So in Kotlin, what you can do is you can add a dependency to the Space SDK. Once you have that one, you can start building your application. Building your application means that you are creating a Space client, and that Space client will be communicating with Space, of course, over HTTP. So you'll need a Ktor HTTP client, and you'll need to specify client ID, client secrets, and of course, the endpoint where your Space organization lives. Once you have that, you have this nice Space client variable that you can start working with. And the Space client exposes all of the endpoints that you will see in the API playground as well. So We saw earlier in the playgrounds that you have the theme directory, and under there was a node profiles, and then that gets all profiles methods. Well, the SDK is structured in a similar way. So if you know where to find a certain API in the playgrounds, this SDK will give you a similar structure in getting to that same API. So for example, if you want to work with chats, you will see that the Space client exposes all of the endpoints. So for example, chats is there. In chats, you can start working with messages or with channels and all that. Some other things that you can do is work with the fields or the data that you want to retrieve from Space. So for example, if in profiles, so we get all profiles, I can specify that I'm only interested in the ID and the name of this profile. If I want to add emails, for example, I can do that as well. And then for every email, just add the email address. And maybe I want the ID. You can customize this and then get that data back from the SDK there if you want. Some other interesting things is if you do this and later on during your application runtime, you access a field that you did not get from the API, you will also get notification with what you have to do on how to solve that and which field you should be adding to the initial requests. Sending chat messages, similar thing. You can also use the chats API, then messages, and then send message. You build the identifier of where you want to send this using message recipients.channel, for example, can be member, can be issue. You give it a name or an ID, and then you can use a nice DSL to build essentially what the message should look like. So in this case, we're adding a section with 2 lines of text, a divider, and then some more text. Well, you can use this to send more data into Space. Other things that you can do is, for example, run a web application. This is a nice web application that I built using Ktor. I'm just going to show it so you get an idea of what you can do with Space. So if this application is running, shouldn't take too long. We'll actually open the browser and then see what happens in the application. Maybe quickly walk you through before we see it in action. There it is. It is responding on port 8080. Good. What this application will do is listen to local hosts on port 8080. If I go in there, it will require authentication using my Space organization. So it sends me to my Space organization where I have to accept or cancel this request to authenticate. Let's just accept. By the way, I submitted all actions. This is something that you probably don't want to do in your application, so only fetch the permissions you need in the application. I'm going to accept this one. Then I should be logged into my application. My localhost application is now giving me back my current username. And even in the application, since I'm now logged in as this specific user, I can also use the API credential for that user and, for example, create a new to-do item. It was just added, and if I now go into Space, you should see in my to-dos that there's this go check out Space to-do item that was added. Just to give you a little example, you don't have to integrate in Space. You can just build a custom application that uses Space for authentication, then does something with it. But you can sort of mix and match how you want to structure things. Completed. I checked Space out. All right. Let's go back to slides for a second. Right. So we've seen the Space SDK, really whirlwind overview of what is in there. Definitely way more than what I just showed you. But I just wanted to show you that we have a strong typed SDK that you can use. We have 2 distributions, one for Kotlin, one for .NET, and it really simplifies how you can work and build your Space applications. Strong type access, so you get nice types. You can build those requests using a nice API that you can use. There are utilities for handling webhook payloads, for example, and there are also utilities for building more advanced applications using the Space SDK. So definitely check it out if you want to start exploring building applications for Space. This is the one you want to probably look at in conjunction, of course, with the HTTP API. Right, and then from here and onwards, all we will be doing is more demos about everything that we have. So far, I've shown you where you can find things, how things fit together. And now let's look at some more concrete examples of how you can build things. So Denis, I'm going to give you the first demo on building a chat application.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Maarten. So as Maarten mentioned, we have examples and tutorials, and you can find them in Space App Tutorials repository on GitHub. And we will now look at one of the applications in that tutorials. So this is the application of create a chatbot. I will now switch to my IDE. So I've checked out the whole repository, and the Kotlin examples are here. And here is the application create a chatbot. And we'll start working with the application by going to Space and creating that application there. So here's my Space organization, brand new, no application so far. Oops, sorry for that. Just will quickly reload the page. Yep. So chatbot demo. Here's our application. And with that application, Space will send messages to the application, and we'll need to receive those messages. So we need to specify an endpoint here. And my application here will be loaded on localhost. And Space cannot access localhost. You can only put HTTPS URLs here. So what you need is some means to forward requests from Space to your locally running application. I will be doing using ngrok for that. So here I have an ngrok channel, and I will copy paste the URL from ngrok. And then I will add API space, because this is the path that I am listening to. Okay, so if I go to Authentication tab, I can see the credentials for my application. And these are the credentials that the application can use to make requests to Space. So we will need these credentials in our app before we can continue. So I will open resources application conf, where we have application configuration parameters. And we will now fill out these parameters. So client ID goes here. Client secret, I will put it right now in plain text, but what you would want to do in a production application is use an environment variable and store this as a secret. And I will also specify the server URL, which I will just copy from the browser. Okay, so now we're ready to run the application. I will run the main method. And as you can see, the application is running. If we just go to the root path, we see here hello from bot. And now let's see how the application handles the requests. So it can be found here in routes KT. A little bit crowded here. You can see that the root path, when we receive requests on the root path, we just respond with hello from bot. However, more interesting stuff happens here when we process requests that come from Space. As you can see, here we handle requests that go to the path API./space. And this is exactly the path that we registered with our application here in the endpoint tab. So before we dive into how the application code is written, let's see how it works in action. I will go to the chatbot demo chat and just send a help command to the application. So the application responds with this list of commands, and we can see that the application implements two commands, help and remind. If I just put remind, then 5, then that thing, we will see the first message that reminder is accepted, and then in 5 seconds, we see another message, the actual reminder about that thing. This is a pretty simple application, and now let's see how it is implemented. So all the implementation is contained here. We handle requests that come from Space. Each request that comes from Space is processed in the same way. We first read the body as a string, and then see here we'll look at a couple of headers, signature and timestamp. And together with the body and these headers, we verify that request came from the space that we expected to. So it is not some forged request. If we couldn't verify the signature, then we respond with unauthorized. And here we handle the payloads from space. As you can see, there is a method call read payload, and this read payload method is a part of SDK. So you don't have to implement parsing of the body yourself. You just call this method, and what you get is an object of application payload class. And there are plenty different application payloads, but here we're only interested in two of them. So the first one is list commands payload. This payload is sent by space when the space needs to list the commands that the chatbot supports. So these are the commands that we need to return here. And the second request is a message payload. The message payload is a request that space sends when a user posts a message into this channel with the application. If any other payload comes, we just ignore it. So first, let's see how the list of commands is implemented. Implementation is really simple. What we do is just return the list of supported commands. We serialize it to JSON and return it as text. So the commands are stored here in a constant, and you can see that there are two commands in this application, help and remind. And together with commands, we define how they are implemented. So when the payload comes, here is what should be done to process the command. Getting back to our when statement, if we look at message payload, so when the user sends a message, what we want to do first is extract the command that the user gives us. So user can either start with it's the string with help or remind, right? So these two commands are those strings that are returned by this helper method, again included in the SDK, so that you can use it. And if the command is not in the list of supported commands, we just return the help command, like run the help command and print help. Otherwise, we will run the command asynchronously, so that we can respond to space instantaneously without any delay. Okay, so now see how we respond, how we process the message payload command. What happens when the user sends the message? Here we parse the payload and get the arguments. The arguments would be two arguments here. The first one is the number of seconds to wait, and the second one is the string that we want to be reminded of. So here is the remind after delay message method, and we send two messages. First, we send a message that the reminder is accepted, and about in a specified number of seconds, we send another message. So let's see how send message is implemented. What we do here is take space client that we initialized here and call the API method send message. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward to send a message from space SDK. You just say .chats.messages .send message, and then you provide two arguments: channel where to send the message and the content of the message. And now let's see how the content is created. This is basically the same thing as Maarten previously showed you with in API Playground. And here it is in action. So we have the root message. And this is a DSL that you're looking at. This is DSL is provided together with SDK, so that you can create messages easily. And there's an outline and a section. For example, this section has two texts, text 1, text 2, and this text 2 is smallish. So here I have this text 1, text 2, and you can see this text 2 is a smaller size. Again, you can explore what the components that can be used in this message by using API Playground, or you can use code completion here and just explore what could be put here in section and outline. Okay, that's it for the basic chatbot example. Maarten, can you please take over?
Yeah, let's switch to my screen and just build a little bit on top of that, but no longer in Kotlin. This time, let's do it in .NET. So I have a chatbot here as well. And in the chat channel, I can type this / command and get information about all of the commands that are available. And I see that I can create, for example, a new catering request. So let's do that. And when that happens, my application will get a payload, the fact that I typed new, like you just showed in the Remind Me bot as well. But instead of just sending text, it will also send buttons with actions. So in this case, what I can do is I see that button, I can click that button, and my application will ask me if I want to get some food. So let's say it's warm here, so let's go with a nice pasta. Any drinks with that? Definitely too warm for coffee and tea, so let's go with a juice. And it will give me back a summary of the order at the end of the interactivity that I did here. Now, interesting, it was all in the same message. So my application has been updating what is shown in space, but also it is responding to the buttons that I click. So you see some previous installments of what I did, where I ordered chicken or no drinks and things like that. So you'll see that it's keeping, first of all, state, but also knows which buttons that I am clicking. So what does this look like in codes? Well, in the application, in the .NET side of things, you don't have this read payload method. Instead, you would implement a webhook handler. And that webhook handler will then do things similar to what you had in the Kotlin application. So for example, if you get a request to list commands, you get that list commands payload as well. And you simply respond with a list of commands that the application supports. Same thing with handling message. You get a message payload. We just check, is it really text? If the text is new, then we start a new session in our catering bots. Next thing we do in the catering bots is essentially just send messages like you've shown in Kotlin as well, except that the messages now also contain buttons, and each button has a post action link to it, and the post action has an action ID that we can use. So when we start, it's only one action, but later on, when, for example, we handle the fact that people select chicken, I actually created some constants there to say, okay, food is selected, and the payload for that food action is going to be chicken or pasta or none or something like that. Interesting thing is that when you get the handle message action payloads, the one that happens when you click a button, you can actually look at the action ID and see, is it selecting food? Well, then you can use the payloads.action value to get the value of which button was actually clicked in this case. So you can sort of mix and match how you get actions and how you send those actions back into the UI. I'm sending messages, but I'm actually doing a send or edit message async, which is a small helper method that I wrote in this application, which you can also find on GitHub later on, where I'm actually checking if the message already exists, then I update the existing one with new buttons and new choices. If not, then I'll just send a new one to the channel. So it looks like a small micro UI within chat, but I'm really just updating messages with new status and new buttons as we go along. Now, not going to go too deep in this, just wanted to show people that this is also a possibility. And I think you probably have a more interesting demo, and that is embedding an application inside of Space. So let's switch back to you. You're muted still, Denis.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, for the demo of embedding application inside Space, let's look at one of the examples from our public repository. Here, it's called application homepage. And if you scroll to the README for first paragraph, you will see that there is actually an installation link that you can follow and install the application to your own organization. Now, previously, we installed the new applications by creating them directly in Space UI, like by pressing a new application button here. But what you can do as well is you can create an installation link that will install the application to whichever organization you want. So here, if I go click here, we have a bad weather today with Space Cloud. Let me try that one more time. Something's definitely happening.
It's the demo gods and the fact that we're streaming and it's taking quite some bandwidth, I guess.
Yeah, we took all the bandwidth. Okay, here we go. So here we see that there are two organizations that they can choose from, and this is because I'm registered in those two organizations and I'm logged into them. So I will choose the Space Apps Webinar organization and install the application there. So here I have a install application dialog, and I just press install. Yep. And as you can see, there is an additional homepage tab that appeared here, in addition to all the other tabs that you've seen previously. So in this homepage tab, there is an area beneath the tabs that is drawn by application. It is an iframe provided by application. So these controls are not provided by Space. This example application has two sections. One demonstrates how the requests can be performed on behalf of the user, and the other one on behalf of the application. So we will start with the one on behalf of the user. The gist of this application is to pick a channel from the list of channels and then compose a message and send the message to that channel. So pretty simple one. What we'll be doing is we will be picking a channel and sending a message on behalf of a user. So application cannot just do it just after showing this application, just after showing this web page. So first, it needs to request permissions from the user to act on their behalf. If the application does not yet have the permission, it can present this warning or any kind of button or link that user presses, and then the Space would present a dialog sorry, let me refresh the page. It seems like Space is not responsive today. Yep. Yeah, so the Space would present a dialog here. And as you can see, we have a homepage demo. That is the name of our application. We'd like to act on your behalf. And what it wants to do, it wants to post messages and view channel info. These are two permissions that are required to list channels and compose a message. So if the user grants the permissions, then we can then proceed with picking a channel and composing a message. And again, there are some delays caused by probably something happening on the Space server. Yep. So here's the list of channels. I will pick a test channel, and I will compose a test message and send message. And let's see what's happened in the test channel. And it's loading. Yep, here's a test message from me because the application sent a message on behalf of myself. What is important to understand here is that the requests are sent from the browser. So the browser obtains the access token to Space and makes HTTP requests directly to Space API. To request a token, the application running in the browser makes a request to the parent window, to the Space UI running here. And then the token is returned if the user consents and gives the permission to the applications to act on their behalf. And that access token can be used by the applications running in the iframe to make requests directly to Space API. Actually, this happens exactly in this file. I can open it here in IntelliJ IDEA so that we can have a look at it right now. But you can view it also on GitHub. So here, on behalf of the user, we make to list channels, we make a GET request to the space server. And we know the URL for getting the channels, this API, HTTP, and then whichever you see, whichever path you see in API Playground. The interesting part here is that we need a user token, an access token, to make this request. And to get that user token, we need to send the request to parent window. And we do it by making a post message request to the parent window here and passing the message channel and receiving the token in the port, in one of the ports of the channel. This can be a lot of technical details, but it's actually not that complicated. And you can read more about it in our documentation. So here it is included. I included a link to that documentation where you can see which requests iframe can make to the Space UI and which data it can retrieve. So getting back to the application, we can also act on behalf of the application itself, not on behalf of the user. And so that part, okay, we will see a lot of loaders today, sorry. Yeah, to act on behalf of itself, an application needs permissions not from any user, but from a space administrator. So when I click here, another dialog is presented. Yeah. Homepage demo requests permissions. So this time the application wants to act on behalf of itself. It requests the same permissions, but space administrator can grant these permissions right here in space iframe without leaving this web page. So the current user that I'm logged in as is a space administrator, so I can grant these permissions. And now the application will be able to retrieve the list of channels and send a message on behalf of itself. So let's see, I pick the same channel, pick a message from, yeah, compose a message from the app, send message, and I'm sorry, I wasn't on the wrong tab. Message from the app, send message. Yeah, here homepage demo application sends a message from the app. So you can, as you can see, depending on who is the acting, who is the actor. If it is me, then it is I'm the author of the message, and if it's application, then application sends the message. All right, so basically that's it for the demo. You can see the whole complete example on GitHub, and also you can look at documentation to find how the iframe can interact with Space UI and what data and it can retrieve, because there are lots of handy stuff. Okay, Maarten, back to you.
All right, I'm going to do one more quick demo. So I'll switch to my screen here. There we are. The application that I have is called Space Translate because I'm really bad at naming and finding cool names. But what you will see when this application is running, let's run it, is pretty much what you've shown earlier, that you can have a custom link that acts like you are coming from the marketplace, for example, and you want to install into any type of space organization. So what I did was when this application launches, I'm printing that specific URL to the log. And when I go in there, I can actually install the application into my app, into my space organization. So let's do that. Let's have a look. I have my demo.jetbrains.space here. Let's install the application. And just like you showed earlier, we're now installing the app. We're giving it a name, Space Translate, and let's click install in this case. And what will happen is that this application is doing a number of things. So first of all, it's requesting more permissions. And second of all, it is also uploading things like a logo and registering a UI extension. So what that looks like in code is, again, a webhook payload. So what you will see is that there, I'm going to make this one a little bit smaller. There is an initialization payload, which will give you the organization that wants to install your app. It will give a client ID and a client secret for that organization for your app, and the user ID, if it's there, for the user that is installing this application. Once you have all that, you can do some initialization, such as uploading a logo, maybe getting permissions. But the more interesting one here is that it can also set UI extensions. And in this case, I'm going to say, look, globally, in this space organization, globally, I want to install as an app UI extension a chat message menu item UI. I can give it a display name, a description, and a unique code that I can then later on use in my application. And what this does is essentially, in any chat channel that I have, register a UI extension. So my colleague here typed something in French. I have no idea what this is. Well, I can click this More button. There is now this translate option because my application just registered this in this space organization. If I click translate, permissions will be requested because the application by default does not have access to this channel to read messages on my behalf. I can grant this, and once that is done, my application will reach out to a translation service online and give me the translation of that message, asking, is anyone here currently working on applications for JetBrains Space? So really small, quick demo of the type of interactivity that you can build there. The fact that you have this initialization payload to sort of set things up, and also the fact that you can register a UI extension from within the code that is there. So with that, I'm going to switch back to slides, and then we'll wrap up a little bit. So if you want to distribute your application, I think I at least hope that is clear from this webinar. You can manually register every application. So if you're building something, if you're developing something, you will probably go into a free space organization or the space organization that you actually have. Go in there, register your application manually, and start building with that. The moment you want to do multiple organization because you want to share your application as a service with others, you can either register in the plugin marketplace or generate one of those direct links that I've been using where you can actually install the application into multiple organizations if you want. When you use multiple organizations, whether that is as a marketplace app or through a direct installation link, your application will get that init payload. And in that init payload are the details to make that initial connection with that specific space organization if you want. So in summary of this webinar, I would say if you want to start building applications, I hope we gave you enough information to get started with it. You can use the HTTP API to use and send data to space. You can receive events from space using webhooks. We have a Kotlin and a .NET SDK that you can use to integrate with space. You can build chatbots, you can add messages, you can add buttons, you can work with the API as well. Custom menus are there, demo that we didn't show, but it's also there. You can do custom link previews. And if you want, you can also embed an application as an iframe and then distribute it through either the marketplace or to multiple organizations with that direct link that we've both been showing. One more thing I want to mention. And I really hope that this webinar gave you some inspiration on what you can do with space at least. We currently have a space applications contest running. So if you have an app idea and you want to build it, go register yourself, build the application, and there's some prizes that you can win. If you have no inspiration, but you still want to build something, we also have some plugin ideas there. I think there's an application idea to build an RSS reader that reads from blogs and then posts into a chat channel. So it shouldn't be too hard to do with what we've shown today. But if you want to get started with that, if you want to build an app for space and for the marketplace, definitely go check out the contest there as well. And with that, I think we're at the point where we'll handle some questions. So what do we have? I am seeing some questions here in our documents. One is about how can we test beta applications on the marketplace? Denis, maybe that's one that you can comment on.
Yeah, sure. Basically, if you want to test your new application and you are developing application, you can just create a test organization on Space Cloud, or you can use a test installation of on-premise space. if you are a part of a beta program. So basically, you just create a test organization, and then when you are ready, you can roll it out to your production organization. And just be careful not to mess up the data in where your real users live.
All right, cool. I think there's a related application there. Is it possible to run the application inside Space like the ones from the marketplace, which is also something that you can test? I think we've shown that with that link that you can install into any organization, get that init payloads, and start working with that. Maybe another question for you, Denis.
And actually, all the both marketplace applications are open sourced. You can find the links to the source code in the application description. Just go to the marketplace, and in the description there is a link to the source code. You will find that there is the same stuff with the iframe, with communication between the iframe and the Space UI. But it is like a little bit more complicated than the example applications. Yep. So it's definitely possible. You can just fork our code and build your own on top of that, or build your own from scratch.
Cool. Maybe another technical question on what is available. I think it was related to the iframe demo. Is there a Kotlin JS library that people can use to interact with Space?
Yeah, currently we do not publish the Kotlin JS library. It is planned, but so far we cannot share it. Unfortunately, it is not ready, but we're working on it.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's the questions that we had. There was one more question about the last demo that I showed. What service have I been using to translate the texts? That was, and I'll paste a link in the chat. That was deepl.com. It's one that I personally like a lot. You can get some free translations there. I haven't actually published this to the marketplace because after a certain amount, you have to start paying for the API, but it's definitely something to check out. All right.
Also, I wanted to add that the HTTP API, we strive to make it as full as possible. And if you have any feedback or if you have a use case that is missing from the API, please reach out, and we will definitely consider implementing it. What we would want to achieve is basically a feature that we have in desktop Space to be accessible through some sort of API. Maybe not in the fullest of details, but we try to have as complete API as possible.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'm not seeing any more questions, so maybe we can wrap up with some more information and where people can find us. So we have a blog, we have a website as well. If you want to reach out, you need something in the API, feel free to reach out through Twitter. If you want to watch the recording of this session, it's going to be on our JetBrains TV on YouTube. We'll also probably do a blog post about it as well. And really, I hope some people watching here are enthusiastic enough about space applications to also start building their own application and join our space applications contests. And I'm actually really curious to see what people will be building and start working with in extending space with. Cool. With that, I'll say thank you, Denis, for joining here as well. Also, thank you to the people behind the curtain here, answering questions and making sure that the technical side of things works. If you like this webinar and you want to get more notifications about webinars, do subscribe to our channel. If you really liked it, give us a thumbs up. You don't have to, but it's always nice to get that feedback. And I guess that's it for today. Thanks again for joining, and see you next time.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.